Hey everyone, welcome to this week's Azure Infrastructure Update. It is the 6th of February 2022. As always, if this is useful, please go ahead and like, subscribe, comment and share and click the bell icon to get notified of new videos. As always, I have the chapters in the description. You can kind of jump along below to get to a particular update you may care about. But first, thank you. We hit the 100,000 subscriber mark, which I think many of you know was kind of a little goal I had for the channel. I'm excited to hit that. So did hit that last Saturday. It's about 9 a.m. in the morning. So super excited. So I'm going to do another Ask Me Anything session to celebrate the 100,000 on the 9th of February at 12 Central Standard Time. So lunchtime, Central Standard Time. So come along and ask general questions about history of the channel, thoughts about things, just general stuff. And because we hit 100,000, now I can be fancy Pooh Bear as a verified channel. We get a tiny checkbox at the end, which means nothing, but I have the tiny checkbox. I don't have the notification I can order my play button yet, but hopefully that's go through a manual check. I should get that soon. New videos. So to celebrate the 100,000, I did do a how it started, how it's going type video back on my very first video I ever created and going through some of the progression. And if you're interested in the history, that video covers that. Then I released a deep dive video into managed disks and the resize capabilities, what I can do, how I can resize them, with a focus on the new live resize capability for data disks. So I show that in action, I show how it's working under the covers, and what some of the limits are about exactly how it can be used. So, on to new features. On the compute side, so we've now got general availability of the ability to use PowerShell from an Azure function using Linux. This is the new Azure Functions Runtime 4.0. Now I can use those PowerShell-based applications, even in my Linux Azure functions. Azure Container Apps now has custom virtual network support in preview. Remember, Azure Container Apps are the idea that now it's a really easy way to run my microservice, my container-based applications. We have Azure Kubernetes services, but I have to understand Kubernetes and deployment manifests and all these different options I have for Kubernetes. Azure Container Apps is still running on Kubernetes, but it abstracts that all away. It's this super simple platform I can just deploy my containers to really quickly. But it also adds support for things like Dapper, that distributed application runtime, that adds a whole set of features for my microservices. It adds the CADA functionality, the Kubernetes event-driven auto-scaling, to really add a lot of power to how I can scale my components, and the Envoy networking sidecars for that networking mesh capability. So all of that together, I get with those Azure Container Apps. But initially, it would only deploy into its own virtual network. Now in preview, I can deploy it, yes, to a new virtual network, but also into my own custom, so an existing virtual network. That's going to enable me to drive that private IP assignment from the IP space of my virtual network. And also I have more control about that outbound internet connectivity, connectivity to other services. So that's now available in preview. On the database side, a whole set of things. So Azure PostgreSQL now has long-term backup retention in GA. There's this native backup for 35 days. That's a good time range for regular operational restorations, a recovery I have to do. But I can also have long-term backup, maybe to meet certain compliance requirements. I have more flexibility. So this long-term retention is part of the backup vault functionality, and it's actually using Azure Blob Storage to optimize my spend. So that feature is now generally available. PostgreSQL Hyperscale has a number of updates. Remember, Hyperscale uses the Citus extension for Postgres. That's what lets me shard the data over multiple database servers to get huge scale, great performance, uses distributed tables and other types of special stuff. So now it has support for new minor versions, 11.14, 12.9, 13.5, and 14.1. It also adds a bunch of new certifications. So here, if I just go and look at the article directly, you can see here, and this is linked in the description below as always, there are some now specific new certifications that are now met for that Azure Postgres Hyperscale. So those are there. Moving on. Now we also have PostgreSQL Hyperscale private link in GA. So this is huge. This is, remember, private link gives me the ability to have an IP address in my virtual network that represents a specific instance of a service. So rather than going via the public endpoint to that service, I'm now accessing an IP address from my VNet that represents that specific instance. I can use that IP address within the VNet, any connected VNet, any on-premises network that's connected via site-to-site VPN or ExpressRoute private peering. I do have the special private link alias DNS name that I have to have resolution for, but now I can use that with Hyperscale. Huge number. I tried to get as many as I could possibly fit into this. So Azure SQL Database or Managed Instance, Azure Key Vault HSM for transparent data encryption, bring your own key. So it does actually have some logic to all of those words. Transparent data encryption encrypts my data at rest. Now what I can have is if I have a customer managed key, I bring my own key, I can use an Azure Key Vault managed HSM to store that key. The whole big deal about the managed HSM is it provides a single tenant security realm with FIPS 140-2 level 3 validated HSMs. So I can use that for the bring your own key, that customer managed key, for that TDE encryption of SQL database, SQL managed instance. Azure SQL, should be database managed instance, TDE, bring your own key, can also now use a user assigned managed identity. Typically, whenever it's a bring your own key, it's system assigned, where it's a one-to-one mapping between that managed identity and the resource. User assigned lets me have a managed identity with its own life cycle, and then I give permission to multiple resources can leverage that managed identity. The benefit there is I can pre-provision that managed identity. I can pre-give it RBAC to other types of resource, use it from multiple resources. So now when I am using that bring your own key, I can use a user assigned managed identity instead of using a system assigned managed identity. Then there are a whole bunch of improvements around SQL Server running in an IaaS virtual machine. There are extensions that give me better capabilities. So from a backup perspective, now the backup has increased from 30 days to 90 days, and I can pick the specific container in the storage account where I want the backups for an instance to actually go. And then from both a deployment and management, there are a whole bunch of enhancements. So if we go and look, just to give you an idea of what's happening. So now during the deployment, so a new virtual machine, we get this SQL Server settings, and I can now change the configuration of the storage. I can configure things like the system database storage location. I can configure the tempdb data and log files. I can configure the collation and much more. And then once I have it deployed, you can see there's a whole bunch of configurations here. And then once it is deployed, once again, in the configuration, I can do things like adding data files. I can increase storage space via the tempdb blade. There's a whole bunch of other things that I can now actually do. So some nice enhancements actually all around that. Miscellaneous. Azure Monitor has a whole set of changes. Storage diagnostic settings has gone GA. So storage accounts always had their own set of configurations, but now it's really fallen in line with all of the rest of the other services. If we jump up to the portal super quickly, if from here, I just go and look at a storage account, for example, now we will see, it still says preview, but diagnostic settings, I pick it for the particular service or the storage account, and I can just now go and add diagnostic settings. I'm only going to see transactions at the storage account level, but I can see those same familiar targets. Or if I actually pick a particular type of service, oh, went too far there. If I pick a particular type of service, then I'll get metrics and whatever log is specific to that type of service, and I can send it to all those various targets. So now I have that nice familiar set available to me that I can use for storage as well. So a nice little capability there. Moving on. The logs connector now has an exact time range capability in preview. So if I think about it, if I'm querying the logs from Azure Logic Apps or Power Automate to a log analytics workspace, what I can now do is I can specify an exact time. As part of the query, instead of having some relative value like 30 hours ago or 24 hours ago or 30 minutes ago, I can have it set to kind of set in query and specify an absolute value. Now, why that's useful, imagine I'm trying to get information about some incident that happened. And I know the incident happened at 2 o'clock. Now I can actually say, hey, I want you to give me the information at 2 o'clock rather than, hey, 20 minutes ago or whatever else. So that's now a simple thing to do in preview. I can now test action groups. So remember, action groups are the things that I can fire off from an alert rule, or if I just create alerts, I can also have those alert processing rules, what used to be called, I think, action rules. So once again, if we go and look at this, I can now test, well, are those action groups going to do what I want them to do? So if we go down to Monitor, look at alerts, obviously I have my alert rules that are triggered off of some metric or log or something else. I have alert processing rules that fire on some scope based on alerts. But we have the action groups, which are the things we actually want to do. Well, now what we can do is test the action group. So if I'm maybe hooking into some API, I'm calling a webhook, I'm emailing people, I can go ahead and actually test them, which is a nice thing that I can do to get some validation and troubleshoot if necessary to make sure things are behaving as I actually plan. Moving on, we also now have the Azure Monitor agent extension has automatic upgrade. So remember, the Azure Monitor agent is the replacement for the old log analytics agent, the diagnostic extension, and the telegraph agent we have for Linux. Now I can turn on automatic upgrade. So I'm jumping back and forth a lot today. But if we go back to the portal, now remember, we deploy the Azure Monitor agent through data collection rules. So if I thought just for a second, I'm back in Azure Monitor, I don't install the Azure Monitor agent directly. I create a data collection rule, and I create it of type Windows or Linux. And then in that rule, I specify, well, what do I want to capture? So in my case, I've got performance counters, and where do I want it to go to? And then we assign it to resources. And that will then deploy that Azure Monitor agent. So in my environment, I've done that for my Linux and for my servers. And then I can now optionally, on that extension, you notice it says disable automatic upgrade because I've already done the enablement. So here you can actually say, hey, I want to enable automatic upgrade, but you'll see mine is already set for automatic upgrade. So I went and made that change earlier. So we have that now for the Azure Monitor agent extension. So now when there's that new version comes out, it's just going to go and deploy that automatically. There's a new Azure Monitor agent syslog support. Now there's a whole number of these. I'm not going to try and go through every one of them, but it can collect syslog events from a whole set of different standard formats and vendors and types. There's some new Cisco, Sophos, Juniper Networks, Corelight, CipherTrust, NXLog, McAfee, and the CEF, the Common Event Format. If you've had any challenges in the past collecting from those, the latest version of the Azure Monitor agent should now resolve that. So upgrade to the latest version, that should all be fixed. Also, IoT Edge, its metrics and information will now be available in Azure Monitor. So I can use the regular Azure Monitor dashboards and alerting for my IoT Edge signals now. Azure Payment HSM is in preview. So as a financial institution, I may have payment applications. I want to move to the cloud. But that financial application has to leverage hardware security modules. And in the past, there was no way to do that. I couldn't have that in the cloud. Well, now Azure has this dedicated bare metal offering that is per dedicated instance. So when I deploy this service, it's not some multi-tenant piece of hardware. I get dual dedicated exclusive access bare metal machines for this. These are Thales PayShield 10K Payment HSMs. So I get a pair allocated to me as the customer, who are the only people that have access. Even Microsoft would not have access once it's allocated. So now I can deploy that service. I use the regular Thales PayShield Manager for that secure remote access to those HSMs. But now I can think about those payment card applications being able to run in Azure. And Azure Sentinel now has GitHub threat monitoring. So if I have GitHub Enterprise licensed, I can take the audit log from GitHub and now bring that into Azure Sentinel. Remember, Azure Sentinel is the Azure SIEM source solution for my incident, my events, and then actually automating responses to it. Now, once I get that audit log brought in, there's a number of built-in analytics rules, and I get access to a workbook. So I can get alerts around repositories created, deleted, payment methods removed, client secrets removed, and that workbook has charts around different types of members of the repository and the repositories I have, forks, clones, etc. So I'm now getting those signals coming in, so Sentinel can now start giving me guidance on that. There's a new Azure AAD Connect v2 release. Remember, today, Azure AAD Connect v2 is not auto-updating, so I need to kind of keep an eye on it. This new version is 2.0.91.0. The big thing here is the Azure AAD Connect Health component is now FIPS compliant. So I can go in, I can deploy this new version, and that may be a big deal depending on your industry. If you're ever not sure what version you have, just start up the Synchronization Service Manager, do About, and it will show you your current version. Azure Virtual Desktop had a number of updates. Remember, Azure Virtual Desktop is that managed service for publishing both desktops and applications. It can be server-based, it can be desktop-based. It even has special multi-user versions of the Windows client. And what they have is now a new version of FS Logix, 2201 in preview. If you had the original classic version of Azure Virtual Desktop, there's now a migration capability to move to the current modern Azure Virtual Desktop. They've increased the number of application groups on my tenant from 200 to 500. And there's a number of URLs I have to be able to get to if I'm the Azure Virtual Desktop agent. So remember, the hosts actually run in my virtual networks. They have to be able to get to certain fully qualified domain names. So I have to allow those. And there were 6 fully qualified domain names that I had to whitelist. Now it's 1. They've got this new star.prod.warm.ingest.monitor.core.windows.net. There's a Gov version as well that's basically the same, but instead of Windows, it's US Gov Cloud API.net. So now it's 1 URL for that Azure Virtual Desktop agent traffic. And finally, Defender for Cloud, Microsoft Defender for Cloud, what was Azure Security Center, had a whole set of updates. I'm not going to go through all of them because there were just so many, but basically there was some new emphasis in it, the solution around Azure Resource Manager Defender. So it's looking at actions on the ARM control plane to have a greater emphasis on kind of these meter attack matrix, and it goes through the ones it really is going to now focus on and exactly what's happening. Then It also talks about recommendations to enable Defender plans on workspaces. And goes through the details there. Auto provision of log analytics agent to Azure Arc-enabled machines. Some depreciated recommendations around sensitive data classification for SQL. Some new known log4shell type alerting. There's now a copy alert JSON button. So when I go and look at an alert, I have this nice copy alert JSON button to just get the JSON for that. Some recommendations were renamed, depreciated some Kubernetes cluster containers, and there's basically a services should listen on allowed ports only recommendation that should be leveraged. Active alert, workbook, system update recommendations, just a whole set of updates all around System Center. Sorry, Defender for Cloud. Mustn't say Azure Security Center anymore. Again, that article is linked in the description below. And that was it. So as always, thanks for watching. I hope that was useful. And again, a huge thanks for helping getting the channel to that 100K. I'm super excited. I'm just waiting for that little YouTube check to happen so I can go and get my silver button. But as always, take care and see you next week.